Turns out, I'm not just a person with multiple sclerosis. I'm a person with MS within a society and a culture and a time and a place. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam. I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 39 years, and I have made this channel for two purposes: to help you sort through the vast amount of information that's out there on the internet and everywhere else, and try to figure out what's reputable and what's just pipe dreaming, and also to encourage one another so that we can live our lives with multiple sclerosis at the highest quality possible. Well, today I thought, instead of being so laser focused on aspects of MS themselves, although I have to admit they're always very interesting, today I want to look at something that requires us to step back a little bit, to get a little different perspective, and to put some things in context that I thought would get you thinking about stuff. It certainly got me thinking about things a little bit differently. Today I wanted to play you a few selections from a video that I watched, a crash course in medical sociology. And it's a lot less academic than you think, or at least this video is.
Sociology touches on everything. It helps us understand every aspect of society, even those that we think are strictly personal, like religion, sex, and gender. And the same is true for another aspect of your personal life: your health and how you take care of it. Many of the factors that determine your health aren't biological, but are social and cultural. For example, research by Harvard sociologist David Williams has shown that factors like race and class, both social constructs, can have profound effects on health outcomes. Sociologists also explore how the definition of disease and illness has changed over time and varies across cultures. So just as health and medicine are regular parts of your life as a social being, so is medical sociology. Medical sociology seeks to understand the ways that society approaches and shapes health, disease, and illness. And we need that understanding because, whether you realize it or not, the diseases that society deems worthy of research or even treatment vary across societies. In fact, how our society treats disease has changed an awful lot just in the last century. And that brings us to medicine, the social institution responsible for treating disease and restoring or improving the health of a population. But the concept we have of medicine as a scientific field is relatively new.
So a couple of things that pertain to us with multiple sclerosis. First of all, something that she calls the sick role, or at least that's the term of art in the field of medical sociology. Very interesting.
Now, just as how we study and treat disease has changed throughout time, so has what we consider healthy. Rather than focusing only on the biology of health, medical sociologists define health as a state of physical, mental, and social well-being. In this way, health is a socio-cultural phenomenon, where the boundaries between being healthy and unhealthy can vary a lot, depending on who you are or where you were raised. For example, how do you know when someone is sick? Sometimes it's easy to tell. When you can hear someone coughing and sneezing from across a room, it's probably time to pull out the emergency and hand sanitizer. But other times you can't tell just by looking or listening. Sometimes diseases like lupus or diabetes don't manifest with easily noticeable symptoms, which means that people who seem visibly healthy may still be sick. Sociologist Talcott Parsons, working within a structural functionalist framework, described the social and cultural responses to disease through the concept of what he called the sick role. Sick roles are the behaviors associated with having an illness. To be seen as sick and get the treatment deserving of being sick, a person must act the way society expects a sick person to behave. The function of the sick role is to create a social space for non-normative social behaviors related to being ill in society. So you don't get to stay home from school just because you feel like it. You have to convince your parents that you're really sick. And unless you've got the stealth skills of Ferris Bueller, that means following the social norms expected of you. Staying in bed, eating chicken soup, sleeping a lot, sniffling, and looking miserable. So the sick role comes with certain rights. You get to skip out on your normal responsibilities, and you're not held responsible for being sick. People tend to believe that you aren't faking illness to shirk your duties. Again, unless Ferris Bueller. But there are also some obligations associated with sick roles. To be properly sick, a person must want to get better. They must also seek the care of medical professionals. When you fulfill the sick role, you get a pass on the normal social behavior expected of well people. But if people don't perceive you as being properly sick, you might not get the same amount of slack. This is why people who have invisible illnesses are often dismissed as just being lazy. Of course, not everyone with the disease plays a sick role. Some diseases, like HIV/AIDS, are heavily stigmatized, compelling some people to hide their illnesses and pass as being well. And sometimes the medical professionals that we depend on may refuse to accept our claims of sickness, which basically withholds your ability to engage in the sick role. There are other critiques of person's sick role, but the point here is that being sick is as much a social and cultural experience as it is a biological dysfunction. Using another sociological paradigm, that of symbolic interactionism, medical sociologists show how health, disease, and illness are constructed by a society. For example, there are shifting definitions of what constitutes a disease. Usually it's defined as a structural or physical dysfunction of the body. So doctors assess whether a person has a disease by looking at their symptoms and using objectively measurable data, like blood pressure or cell counts, to determine if they match the profile of a certain disease. But what constitutes a disease is not uncontroversial, and the parameters for determining whether someone has one is politically contested. Yes, politically. Remember, sociology touches on everything.
Another thing that she talks about are what they call illness beliefs. And this, too, I think really affects those of us with multiple sclerosis as we live our lives in the culture and society, the time and the place that we find ourselves.
Now, another way medical sociologists approach health is to look at illness. It's sometimes said that a person walks into a doctor's office with symptoms but leaves with a disease. While a disease defines a dysfunction of the physical, an illness is the social and cultural response to a disease. And your perception of illness is likely to vary a lot depending on who you are. People have what are called illness beliefs, assumptions about the severity and nature of symptoms. An illness belief doesn't have to be accurate, but the accuracy matters less than how the beliefs make you feel. Illness beliefs help explain why some people seek treatment for symptoms while others may ignore them, or why some people strictly adhere to medical advice while others blow it off. Factors like race, social class, gender, or age can shape illness responses to disease as well. For example, women consult doctors significantly more than men. Men are more likely to ignore pain or downplay the significance of symptoms. Social institutions can also influence illness beliefs. Family is one of those social institutions. Did your parents make a big fuss whenever you got sick and let you stay home from school at the drop of a hat? Or were you raised to tough it out and not miss school unless your arm fell off? For adults, your work environment can also shape your illness response. In the United States, businesses are not required to provide employees with paid sick leave. For people who aren't able to take time off work without losing wages or losing their job, only the most severe symptoms might make them admit that they're really sick. More broadly, institutions within health services, hospitals, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, play a major role in defining illness responses by 1, defining what constitutes a disease, and 2, shaping who has access to treatment. All patients are not created equal in the US healthcare system. Which patients get quality care varies by social group and by how much our society values certain diseases. This, in turn, shapes illness responses and illness behaviors. And so we end up right back where we started, with the fact that medical sociology helps us to understand the ways that culture and society shape health, disease, and illness.
That was very thought-provoking. When I think about the sick role and how that has been part of my life, even growing up, I remembered my mother and my grandmother always taking responsibility and prioritizing that over taking care of themselves. And that's what my model was growing up, and that's what I decided that I was supposed to do as well. So if I didn't feel really great, I still went to school anyway. And if I didn't feel really great later on in life, I still went to work anyway. To the point where I one time went to my secretary, said, "Go home, we don't want you here." Well, of course, that translates over into life with multiple sclerosis too, because I'm playing a sick role now that I'm not really sure I want to play, but there's no avoiding it at this point. So what does that really mean? And how much do I want to focus on the sick role? And how much do I want to give people reason to believe that, yes, indeed, she really is sick? I think when we're in early multiple sclerosis especially, that whole thing about the sick role and society's expectations of what the sick role really is, kind of hard for them to grasp. The first symptoms that most of us have are things like optic neuritis. And we don't necessarily show that. It's not a visible thing. People can't see any change in us. They can only choose to believe what we tell them. I think over time, as we become more disabled, it becomes more obvious and more visible. But be that as it may, it's still something that we have to realize is more or less acceptable depending on the society, the culture, the family structure, our role in life. All of those play a factor in how we live out our illness with multiple sclerosis in the company of others. But I'm really curious what you think of all this. Does any of it get you thinking about your own situation in life? I've done some videos about medical gaslighting and about whether society has changed its attitude toward people with disability, and I'll link those down below. But I wonder sometimes if there really hasn't been as big a change as we'd like to hope that there is, just because society doesn't move on a dime usually. Beliefs like that are pretty tightly held, and they're based on so many factors. As we've said before, a lot of it depends on how you grew up or what the expectation was that was placed on you or you even placed on yourself. We also know that even though multiple sclerosis now is recognized as a disease that is not limited to white North American and Northern European people, people of color still have a different interaction with the medical system oftentimes. Not always, but oftentimes they do. It also depends a lot, of course, on your social class and what kind of insurance you have, and etc., etc., etc. That's part of why MS can be so frustrating, because when we live out our MS, we're not doing that in a vacuum. We're doing that amongst a group of people. And depending on how that group of people treats us and regards us and supports us, having MS can be more or less challenging. What do you think? Leave me a comment. I'd be interested to know what your experience has been. But that's all I have for you today. So until my next video, of course, your number one priority is to take really good care of yourself and keep yourself as healthy as you can so your quality of life remains as high as it can be. And I will see you again in my next video.